Say hello to everyone, and what I'm going to talk about today is book contracts. So yesterday I shared that I have a book contract with the Yale University Press for my Audre Lorde book, and I've received some inquiries about getting book contracts. So I'm going to talk about the Yale book contract, but I'm going to talk about that one last. I'm going to talk about my other book contracts before the Yale book contract, and then I'll go into more detail about the Yale book contract because that's the most recent one. So my very first book contract I got for my book, I always forget which side it's on, but this one, Hannah Arendt and the Negro Question, that one. And so that book contract I got with Indiana University Press. And so one of the ways or how I built up to getting that book contract, I will say with all of these book contracts, it really is about relationships that you develop with people. So there are a lot of books out there that are not very good books but have contracts and have been published, and then there are some amazing book projects out there that have not yet been published, right? And so in my experience publishing with academic presses in particular, a lot of it did have to do with mentors supporting me, or friends connecting me with editors and presses and things like that. So again, with my first book contract, Hannah Arendt and the Negro Question, I published that with Indiana University Press. And I was introduced, Dee Mortensen was the editor at Indiana now. I think she has since retired. But I was introduced to her through several mentors. One was a white woman who was very prolific, who still is very prolific, and had published with a bunch of presses. And so when you go to conferences, I'm sure this is multiple academic conferences. I go to philosophy conferences. I go to I used to do American Studies, I used to do Women's Studies, I used to go to a lot of different discipline or interdisciplinary conferences, but this is particularly at philosophy conferences, mostly I want to say at SPET, which is Society for Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy. And so she would basically take me to the book exhibit, and she walked me around and introduced me to every editor at every press where she had published a book. And at that point, it was like maybe 12 or 15 different presses that she introduced me to. And so one of them was Dee Mortensen at Indiana University Press. I should do a quick introduction. So this is Dr. Catherine Sophia Bell. I'm a Black woman who did all the things Black women are told we're supposed to do. I got all the degrees, had a marriage, had 4 kids, had a successful career in academia for 20 years, received tenure and promotion to associate professor. And right before I went up for promotion to full professor, I realized, I knew for about 10 years that I was working on my exit out of the academy, and I decided to resign/retire from my tenured philosophy professor position. I also held some administrative positions. And so part of what I want to talk about with the book contracts are, the contracts that I got when I was still a professor, when I was still in the academy, and my most recent book contract with Yale University Press, which I have gotten post being in the academy, right? Okay, so back to Indiana University Press. So there was a white woman professor who was one of my mentors who introduced me to Dee Mortensen and some other people. And then I also had a white male mentor at the time who set up a couple of dinners with Dee, right? So I had multiple points of contact with Dee about the book. And what it was about, the timeline for it getting done. So I will say with all of my previous books, other than this Audre Lorde book that's under contract with Yale, all my previous books, I wrote the book first, and then I submitted the book. And I also did not submit a book proposal for any of those books, right? So I talked to Dee about the book and what the project was about. She was very interested in it. And then I sent her the whole book. I think the only thing that was missing from that manuscript when I sent it in was like half of a chapter. I have a chapter on revolution, and I wanted to engage Arendt in the question of the Haitian Revolution, and I just needed some more support around the resources and the scholarship around that. So I sent the manuscript in with that incomplete chapter, expecting the peer reviews and reader reports to help me fill in some of the gaps in the literature for that. But I sent the whole book in with just a cover letter. So for people who are in La Bellevue Writers, you have access to my cover letters and my writing course suite. So I include my cover letters that I use for the publication. For the book manuscript book contracts, right? So I say all of that to say I sent in the book manuscript with a cover letter. I got my reader reports. I responded to the reader reports and said, what revisions I was going to do. I did the revisions. Well, actually, after I got the reader reports and responded to the reader reports, at that point, I got a contract from Indiana University Press. And then I spent some time working on the revisions, sent it back into the press, and then it went through, the production cycle, right? So that was for Hannah Arendt and the Negro Question. Now, for my co-edited book, which is this book, Convergences, Black Feminism and Continental Philosophy, that's a book that I co-edited with Maria de Guadalupe Davidson and with Donna Del Mercano. Maria was already working on co-editing this project. She reached out to me and asked me if I knew anybody else who was working on a similar project. And I told her I had been thinking about doing something with Black feminism and the continental tradition. I had just done a paper on Fanon as a French feminist. And then I knew that Donna Del Marcano had also been thinking about this question, but neither one of us were really planning on doing a co-edited volume per se. We had both just presented at like a French feminist conference, like within that same year that Maria reached out to me. So Maria decided to include us in as co-editors for that project. And as we were sending out requests for contributors, I think she had already secured a number of contributors, but one of the contributors was Tina Chanter, who had been a former professor of both Donna and I at the University of Memphis. And she was the editor of a series with, I think that book came out with SUNY Press. And so she was interested in publishing the book in the series that she had, that she was an editor for. So that's how we ended up getting the contract for the Convergences, Black Feminism and Continental Philosophy book, right? But again, it was like relationships, people who, it wasn't like a cold send out a proposal kind of thing. It was like people who we were in relationship with, or people who, saw the project, saw the quality of the project and decided they wanted to get on board with it, right? So that was the co-edited project, Convergences, Black Feminism and Continental Philosophy. Then my second book project is Beauvoir and Belle, a Black Feminist Critique of the Second Sex, which is this book. That book was published with Oxford University Press. Oh, I will say with the Convergences book, I'm pretty sure Maria did have a proposal together, but I didn't write a proposal for that. But Maria probably already did have a proposal that went to Tina for that book and for that book contract. But it did also go under, all of these projects went through a peer review process. Okay, so for Beauvoir and Belle, a Black Feminist Critique of the Second Sex, I initially planned on publishing that book with Indiana University Press because I already had a really good relationship with that press. But then I also, at the time that I was writing this as a single author manuscript, I also wanted to do like a companion edited collection, which I haven't done, which I still have to decide if I'm still going to do that. But it was a priority for me at the time. And so I wanted both of them to come out with the same press, where I would do the single author manuscript and then I would do the edited collection as a companion to the manuscript. So Indiana at the time was not able to commit to both. They could do the single author manuscript, but they weren't really interested in edited collections like reprints of previously published articles or essays. But Oxford was open to that. So the editor that I worked with at Oxford was Linda Martine Alcoff, who was also one of my mentors and whom I love and adore. And so she was excited about the Beauvoir book. She had been in attendance at a lot of conferences where I presented several chapters that ended up going into the book. So she kind of saw how the book expanded and grew and evolved over time. And she talked to the other, like the editor, not just the series editor, but the editor at Oxford, and they were open to doing both the single author manuscript and the edited collection. So that's why I ended up going with Oxford, because I wanted to do both, and Oxford was open to doing both and willing to do both. Again, I have to see if I'm going to revisit that edited collection idea for the Beauvoir project. But again, I did the full manuscript first. I sent the manuscript in with a cover letter, so I did not do like a formal book proposal for any of those projects, or for my two single author projects anyway. I wrote the book, I sent it in with a cover letter, and also for people in La Bellevue writers, you do have access to the sample cover letters where you can see, and basically what I talk about is like, what are the core arguments from the text, and short summaries or abstracts of each of the chapter in the text, the interventions it's making, similar titles, those kinds of things. So I addressed some of the stuff that would be in a formal book proposal, but I did not send in a formal book proposal. And again, with those projects, the book was written first, and I submitted the whole book manuscript as opposed to sending a proposal with like one or two chapters, right? So those are my first three books. Again, two single author books, one co-edited book. And then that brings us to the Audre Lorde book. So for the Audre Lorde book, this is the first book project that I've had where the whole project came to me on the front end. Usually I have an idea, I'm interested about something, I have, intellectual curiosity about something, and I just pursue, whatever path my intellectual curiosity takes me. So with the Audre Lorde project, my entry point into the Audre Lorde project was around the conception of care. So I had done several conference presentations on the Audre Lorde's conception of care. I'm also very interested in Audre Lorde's philosophy of the erotic, right? Like I'm interested in that in my personal life. I do work on that with La Belle Vie Academy and like my happily unmarried erotic empowerment stuff. So I've been working with Lorde in the erotic for a while, and then also Lorde and care for a while. So in doing some research around more so Lorde and care than Lorde and the erotic, I decided to go to Lorde's archives, which are at Spelman College, which is also where I went to college as an undergraduate. So I spent a couple weeks in Atlanta at the archives, at Lorde's archives, and at Spelman. And again, I went in with the interest of finding more stuff on Lorde and care, but then I came across all of these other materials that just started to shape these different chapters. So literally, like as I was going through the archives and going through her papers, it just kind of flowed like, oh, okay, I need to think about Lorde in these different contexts, in these different roles, in these different capacities, and these different philosophies that she offered. So again, that's the first time that I've been able to like really think about a project as a whole, as opposed to like starting with one idea and work. I mean, in some ways, I still started with one or two ideas, the philosophy of care and the philosophy of the erotic, and expanded from there. But I could see where else I was going like before I got there. So that's how the Lorde project came together. Then I have a good friend who I'm going back and forth like with the co-edited project. I can name names because like the names are on the books already in terms of the co-editors and things like that. But with other things, I'm not necessarily naming names because I have not gotten permission from people to name names. So I do need to check in with people before I tell some of these stories. Okay, so anyway, so a good friend of mine was already publishing a project with Yale University Press. And so she knew that I was also working on this Audre Lorde project. And so she introduced me to people that she knew at Yale University Press. So she sent an email basically saying like, hey, this is Catherine Belle. She's working on this awesome project on Audre Lorde. I thought you guys might be interested. So, I'm connecting you. So she did like an email introduction for us. And then the wonderful thing about this is, I want to say this was March of 2023, which was also the year, or like late February 2023, which was also the year that I decided to resign/retire from my professor position. So I actually was at a kink event in Costa Rica at the time that this email introduction was made. And I remember, so my friend sends the email to these two people at Yale. Both of them respond, of course, we would love a project on Audre Lorde. We look forward to hearing more. And I was in the thick of, so this was like the end of February going into March 1st. So I'm at the kink event. I tell them, like, I'm like in tears. I'm like, oh my goodness, my friend made this introduction. I'm working on this book on Audre Lorde, and, this press is interested in it. So I'm literally like happy tears crying at this kink event in Costa Rica. So then March 1st is, I think, the day that I was leaving Costa Rica from that kink event, and also the day that I officially submitted my letter of resignation from my professor position. So I resigned from the professor position on March 1st, effective June 30th of 2023. So once I heard back from the press, I said, I'm traveling internationally now, but once I get back to the U.S. and get settled, I will follow up, because I had a draft of, so again, this was the first book that I had thought about the whole book. So I actually did have a draft of a book proposal, and the same friend that did the introduction had given me her book proposal as well as a sample book proposal. Right. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'll get back from Costa Rica, I'll get some things settled, and then I'll do some revisions to this proposal, and I will go ahead and send it out. But of course, there was just a lot going on in my life at the time, because I had just resigned from my professor position. So I was working out the details of like getting my house in order to put it on the market to sell the house. I had already bought a house in Savannah, so like where I was going was settled, but like getting the loose ends tied up in State College was still in the works. So there was just a lot going on. And then also I had decided to allow my kids to go, my older two kids were already over 18, but my younger two kids who are still minors, I decided to allow them to go with their dad during that next school year. So we were at a natural kind of transition point where my youngest was going from elementary school to middle school, and then my second youngest was going from middle school to high school. So we decided to try out them going with their dad for the academic year and being with me during like the summer and the breaks. And that was like not an easy decision for me to make. So there was just a lot of emotions going on in terms of like what was going on with the kids, getting the house in order to get the house sold so that I could just like leave Pennsylvania and be done with Pennsylvania. Like I did not want to keep property there. I did not want to keep anything there that was going to make me feel anchored or tied to a place that I no longer wanted to be. So that's a long way of saying I told them I'll follow up with you when I get back to the United States and I get settled, but it took me a long time to get settled. So, weeks go by, months go by, almost a full year goes by. I don't really get a chance to take a really close look at the Lorde, not manuscript, but the Lorde book proposal until like January of 2024, right? Because, and part of this is also because I was still wrapping up, tying up loose ends for the Beauvoir and Belle book, right? So I was still I think I had gotten the copy edits from them. I hired another editor to kind of review the copy edits and check for errors that I might have already missed. Then I didn't even get the page proofs until like 2024, until like January or February 2024. So there was just a lot going on that kind of got in the way of me getting back to this Lorde proposal in earnest. So, eventually I was able to sell the house in Pennsylvania, I think by like maybe August of 2023. I was getting settled in Savannah. I knew that I was going into this fellowship in Germany in January 2024. So it wasn't until I got to the fellowship in Germany that I was able to really like in earnest put my eyes back on this Audre Lorde book proposal, do some revisions to it, and send it back out. So basically I reached back out to those two editors. Well, one editor is at Yale, one is just kind of associated with it. I don't think he's officially an editor there. But I reached back out to both of them and said, hey, I was introduced to you guys almost a year ago about this Lorde project. I've had a lot going on since then, including retiring from my academic position. And so I also included a link to the exit interview that was published about my decision to leave the academy. And so I said, if you're still interested, I'm moving forward with, my Beauvoir and Belle book is about to be out because it didn't come out until like May of 2024. And, I'm turning my attention in earnest to this Audre Lorde book project. So, here's the proposal. Let me know what you think. And so the editor was like, oh, it's wonderful to hear from you. Congratulations on your decision to leave the academy. And so she took the book proposal, she reviewed it, and then she said, I'd love to talk to you about this. So we set up a meeting. I think we did a Zoom to talk about the book proposal. So we talked through it. It was very exciting. Like she really got what else I sent her? So I sent her. So in the proposal, I described some of the previous work that I'd done on Lorde. So I'd done like this keynote address at the Ida B. Wells conference at the University of Memphis back in like 2019. I had just done some stuff with Audre Lorde and Patricia Hill Collins at this Patricia Hill Collins symposium in like March of 2023. And so I mentioned both of those in the proposal. And so she said, I would love to take a look at those presentations that you mentioned. And so I said, well, they're presentations, they're not publications, but, we'll give you some context for like how I'm engaging Lorde. So I did send her that material as well. And so that was really helpful because I typically would not have sent like a conference presentation as a writing sample for a future publication. But it ended up, I think, really helping because she got the bigger context of like how because in both of those conference presentations, I talk about my own lived experience and how I'm engaging Lorde and Lorde's philosophy as part of that experience. And so I think it just gave her a nice, bigger picture, broader picture of like how I was approaching Lorde and how I was approaching the writing. And it does still, even though they're conference presentations, you still get a sense of like my voice and my writing style and things like that. So I found that to be very helpful because by the time we talked about it, like I had been thinking about the book project in one particular way in terms of like the genre, I'll say the genre of it I was thinking about in one particular way. And she really invited me to like liberate myself from the constraints of the particular genre I was thinking about to consider these other things that she could see coming out thematically and philosophically. Hey, how are you doing? In terms of the project. So it was very helpful to go ahead and send that proposal to her, send the samples of again, they weren't really writing samples in the sense of articles, but writing samples in the sense of these conference presentations, and to talk about that. And she was so enthusiastic about the Lorde project, and she was so excited about like what I could do bringing these things together in terms of my own voice and experience and what I was doing with Lorde and her philosophy. So we had a wonderful conversation, and she gave me some suggestions for how I could, for next steps. And then I also mentioned to her at one point I was thinking about this book as two different book projects. So I was going to look at Lorde's like more of a philosophical biography of Lorde, as well as a book just like separately on Lorde's philosophy. And ultimately, I decided to merge the two together, along with some other like memoir and some other things, right? So I'm describing it as an autobiomythography, pulling from Lorde's language of biomythography with Zami, a new spelling of my name, right? So all of that was just helpful with, again, talking to a really good editor. And then I also talked to her about this transition that I'm making from more academic writing that's rigid, like more rigid. I mean, I feel like all my writing is accessible, but there is still a way that one writes when one is in the academy that I'm like trying to transition out of. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm excited about it. That I'm trying to transition out of with like my future publications and book projects. So we talked through some of those things. So all of that to say, I had a really wonderful conversation with the editor at the press. I incorporated some of her suggestions, and she offered me a book contract. And so at one point, and then I also talked to, like I said, my good friend was already publishing a book with them, and she'd had a good experience. And then like one of her mentors is also publishing a book with them, and she was having a good experience. And then I also know of another author and scholar who's doing like a new project with them. So like I think she's probably in the beginning stage of her project. And so I checked in with her as well, and I said, okay, well, what has been your experience with them up to this point? And so she was like, up to this point they've been fine. All of them did have some feedback in terms of like how long it took to get the contract and everything in order, but overall they all had positive experience with this press and with this editor. So all of that to say, those are all the that was the kind of progress of events that for me getting this book contract with Yale University Press for the Audre Lorde project. So again, it differs from my previous experiences insofar as with my previous two single author books, I wrote the whole book first before submitting it to the press, and then I got the contract after they had reviewed the whole book. Whereas with this, and then with this one, I did submit a book proposal, but I did not submit, like, again, the editor had access to these writing samples from conference presentations that I did, but I did not submit a sample chapter specifically from the book with my proposal. And it did go out for peer review, so I did still get reader reports back based on the proposal, but not based on any particular chapters I hadn't done. I had not sent any chapters, and I'd only sent in those two samples from conference presentations. So one difference was like sending in the whole manuscript with my previous two single author books and just sending in a proposal with no, sample chapters for this particular book and still getting a contract. The other difference is I was still in the academy for my first book, two books, right? I was still a professor, whereas with this one I had already resigned/retired from being in the academy. And so one of the reasons I'm sharing this experience is because I really want people to see that, and I talk about this a lot just in terms of my exit strategy and my decision to leave academia. Just because you walk away from the academy doesn't mean that you're walking away from the relationships that you've cultivated, doesn't mean you're walking away from intellectual community, doesn't mean that you have to walk away from continuing to be a scholar. But now, I still continue to be a scholar, I continue to be a philosopher, but I'm able to do it on my own terms, right? And so hopefully this offers some encouragement for people who are considering leaving academia, and with everything going on, it would not surprise me if people are thinking more seriously about that. I want people to be able to walk away on their own terms, and know that if you want to continue to do scholarship, if you want to continue to speak, if you want to continue to write, there are still pathways to do that, right? Again, my previous scholarship already laid a strong foundation for me continuing to do this. So, I can't speak to people who maybe don't have the PhD, or people who got the PhD and did not go into the academy but went immediately into independent scholarship. I do know at least one person who's done that really successfully is Alexis Pauline Gumbs, right? So she has a PhD and was intentional about not following the path of like the traditional academic tenure track job route, and she's done amazing, and she's done things on her own terms. For people who are looking for that kind of example or model, I think Alexis Pauline Gumbs offers a great model for people who got a PhD and then pursued scholarship on their own terms as an independent scholar and still won all the fellowships and all the book awards and all the things. So those are some of the things that I love about Alexis, other than her being like a fabulous human. But in my case, I had a strong track record for being in the academy for 20 years, publishing a few books, publishing several articles, book chapters, and all of those things. So I had that track record to go alongside my proposal for this Audre Lorde book. But I think some people fear, if you're in the academy and you're thinking about walking away, some of the fears, I mean, of course there are fears around like money and like that. So I talk about financial fears usually have to do with money and being able to pay your bills. Existential fears usually have to do with like your sense of identity, if it's so tied to the academy or to your position or to your tenure, like who are you outside of that. And then I also talk about freedom, the importance of like being towards freedom and not being locked down and constrained by institutional structures, or being at institutions that or in systems that are no longer aligned with you, right? So when I talk about exit strategies, those are three of the main things that I talk about. But some of the fears also have to do with being disconnected, feeling cut off from your intellectual community or your academic community. And so I often share, in my experience, I do not feel cut off in any way from my intellectual community, right? Like I'm still very much in conversation with people. And part of that is because I have La Bellevue Academy and I have La Bellevue writers. So there are some brilliant, fabulous, and amazing writers and La Bellevue writers. So I can continue to have these very intellectually stimulating conversations that are very interdisciplinary, because we have people who are historians, people who are in like art historians, sociologists, political theorists, all of that kind of stuff. So I continue to enjoy being in intellectually stimulating conversations through that and through other means that I won't get into. So hopefully this has been helpful information in terms of like not only how I got the book contract with Yale University Press in particular for my most recent book, but also my previous experiences. And I think it is, again, good to be able to juxtapose like what was the experience when I was still in the academy versus the experience once I walked away from the academy. But I'm excited about the book project. It's still a work in progress. So again, whereas my previous two books, I finished the books before I got the contract. With this one, I do have some, at this point, I do have sample chapters that I'm revising, and I still have some chapters that I need to write. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about getting into that. So yeah, that is it in a nutshell. Hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. For people who are on, who are going to be watching this on YouTube, definitely subscribe and like and comment. I would like to hear if you have questions, and you can do this in the comments in the live as well. If you have particular questions for me, feel free to drop questions in the comments or DM me with questions that you might have. And if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the comments, and I'm happy to respond to your questions or in anything you want to share about your own experiences with publishing and getting book contracts. Okay, have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.